Connor, it's so good to have you on an N of one. You and I have been friends a long time. And so it's I'm really glad we get to tell your story to other folks. Thanks for hanging out with me today.
Me too, Matt. I have called you a friend and a mentor, and so I'm grateful to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be super fun. So we always, the goal of an N of one is as behavioral scientists, we generally look at things that are applicable across large numbers of people, right? That's how the science works. It's probabilistic science across lots of people. And so we don't always get to focus on individual stories. And this is an opportunity to kind of tell those N of one stories that help people see it and be it pathways into the field. And so we always start in the same place, Connor. I want to talk about like 7-year-old Connor. Like I want to talk about like kid Connor.
Oh man, okay.
If I had gone and like traveled back in time and talked to kid Connor at 7, what would you like? What did you think you were going to do in the world? What did you think the world was about as a 7-year-old? I'm going to be an astronaut. Like, what was going on for you?
I wish I could tell you exactly where I was. I don't know. I do know that I always have wanted to travel. And I just got back from a trip to Antarctica, and it was a milestone trip, something that I've wanted to do literally since I was actually 7. My mom showed me this book of places I wanted to go. So I've always been an explorer. I've always been a person who has been very interested in just what the world has to offer. At 7, I don't know if I was that focused on people, but I had definitely that exploration and that interest in all of the cavities that the world can offer really began to catalyze when I realized a lot of it is actually within a human mind. And so that was a little bit later in life. But yeah, 7-year-old Connor has always been someone who likes a good adventure and likes to solve a good problem and or at least attempt to try to understand a situation better. And that's carried through my whole life.
Yeah. Interesting. So you were like, there's a big wide world out there and I want to be part of it and I want to go everywhere and experience everything. Uh,
100%.
that sort of wide aperture version. Do you remember like were you a school kid? Were you like school is really great? Were you sort of mad? Were you like, oh man, I hate going?
You know what's funny? It's I've always been bookish and appreciated academics. Well, I wouldn't since even say appreciated. I always excelled in I was in advanced classes. I tested as a I did like I can't remember what it was called, but in Illinois there was this like advanced testing system that I got accepted into, tested for, got accepted into a bunch of nice private schools, but my parents couldn't afford them. And so between that and honestly kind of the upsetness that I had of like not really understanding why, like I was like, wait, I still have to go to public school even though I can go to these nice schools. And then my parents divorcing, I really stopped caring about academics for a good chunk of my life until I really more in my bachelor's degree is when I picked that back up. So I have appreciated academics, but I've also used it as a way to displace my anger at the world to not care about it.
I see. So there's the rebellious Connor with a like maybe not an external mohawk, but an internal mohawk. Rebel Connor.
I had red hair too, so there was an external crazy haircut.
All right, well there you go. Well, let's fast forward a little bit because so talk to me about like sort of maybe, middle school, high school Connor who isn't feeling like school is necessarily a place where they belong or like feel like very smart but maybe not a joiner. Like talk to me about, if I had fast forwarded to your freshman year of high school and said, "Okay, Connor, what are you going to do with your life? What are you going to be?" What do you think the answer would have been then?
Absolutely no idea.
Oh,
Uh, it was I really rebelled. I started working when I was 13, and
what was your first job?
oh, it was a great job. It was called MC Speedway. Do you know what slot cars are?
Yeah, 100%.
You know, okay, cool. Not everybody knows what slot cars are. For those that don't know, it is a car that you literally has a little slot that has different types of metal that touches a track, electrifies it, and then you use a little accelerator gun to make the track go around, or car go around the track. I love that place. It was like a home away from home for me. And so I talked to the owner, and finally he gave me a job. He just paid me under the table, I worked there for a couple of years. Loved that job. Um, and I think it was great because I learned a good work ethic, having A, the reward of having money, and then B, just knowing if I work, I can get paid, but I actually have to show up on time. I actually have to work. I actually have to to have customer service, etc. That was great. And I think it was such a deviation that I just leaned into that. I didn't care about school. I didn't care about my family. I just got to kind of work. And at such a young age, it definitely I do remember, it's funny. I remember multiple times it was at a mall and I would go and eat lunch in the cafeteria. And that's the earliest memories I can think of thinking about people is I'd be sitting in the mall and I'd be thinking to myself, there's a lot of people around here. And I'd be watching them and I'd be thinking like, why are those people acting that way and those people acting that way? So that is where some of the planted seeds of human psychology and that fascination with human behavior began to arise. But most of it was just, 13, 14. I was working there. 15, I began to caddy. And then I got a job at a golf course doing more just like internal stuff. I picked up a bunch of different jobs along the way. And so by 16, I had a car. First car was a 2001 Mustang. Loved it. It was amazing. It was a terrible car for a 16-year-old to have. And I somehow didn't wreck it, but I definitely beat it up. But it wasn't until I turned 17, I had a 2.0 GPA and I had zero aspirations of going to college. I was contemplating dropping out of high school. And that was the first time when I actually had just a gentleman that came into my life that was a good guide and just sort of, he was a guy I met at the gym and just kind of pushed me a little bit and was like, I can tell you're smart. Why are you acting like
What
this?
what are you doing?
Yeah, exactly. And that encouraged me along with a few other things that changed in my life. That I was like, I should try a little bit harder. And then that was where that pivot. I began to ask myself too. I lost my uncle to drug overdose, and I really appreciate and thank my mom still to this day for she kind of had to sit down with me and was like, "Hey, you're going on his same path, and you got to see that, and that's the path you're on right now." And she's like, you're a smart kid. I've known that. And I think you're just not applying yourself. And so you really should consider what you need to do to try to get off that path. And I'm grateful between that gentleman that came into my life, a few other people, I decided, okay, I might as well try again. And I got 4.0 as the rest of my high school, which was enough to get me into my undergrad. And all that while watching myself change. And actually the biggest thing that really catalyzed all of it was when I was going through this academic change, the bigger change that was happening was I was losing 100 pounds. I weighed about 265 pounds, and at my lowest weight, really, I was down to like 155, 150. So I really had almost over lost weight, but nonetheless, I was losing all this weight, and my entire world was changing because of it. I lost all my friends. I was getting so much new attention while also losing the old attention. I was seeing this change that a single change in myself of deciding to both become healthier in my physical decisions and in my mental decisions by leaning more into the academics and all of that really opened up the world in a way that completely changed everything. And that made me really begin to question the human mind, and not just mine, but how my mind connects with other people's minds and community in the more sociological viewpoint. All of these things started to come into my mind and began to question it. And so that was where, mixed with the academics, I began to go, well, this is actually rather interesting. Why don't I go and explore this further? And that was what I decided. I'd go to college and figure out what that meant. So I wanted to applying to college for a marketing degree, but I knew I wanted to do something with the human mind.
Yeah, that was sort of you were anticipating my question, right? It is, it is hard to go from a 2.0 to 4.0 and keep the same friends, right? Because 2.0 friends have 2.0 friends and 4.0 friends have 4.0 friends, and it's rarely do those two groups mix.
100%. Very different activities.
It's very, yeah, I mean, how you spend your time. I mean, there's just a different demand curve there for sure. So you figured out, all right, I need to go to college in order to be successful, in order to get off this path that I'm on. I need to go to college. I vaguely think that's going to have to do with humans, but I don't really know what it means yet. I just know college is. It's not like I have a grand goal. I'm just said I know college is the next thing. So you went marketing. You thought, all right, I'm going to go and marketing is going to be where I'm start. Did you sort of know at the time I'm going to start with marketing, but I'm not sure this is where it really leads, or did you really think marketing was the thing?
No, I had no idea. I
Okay.
was like, so my mom's side of the family didn't go to college, but my dad's family came from a bunch of like truly like madmen. My grandpa was Leo Burnett in Chicago, and so marketing has been woven throughout my dad's a salesperson. And so and in all of his like family as somehow in marketing or sales. So it was just kind of like, cool, I'll do that. That sounds like that thing that I think my uncle kind of was like, you should apply to business school because it's the most practical and then you can figure it out. And I was like, cool, what should I apply for? And they're like, why don't you try marketing? Okay, cool.
They're like,
So
you've had red hair. Clearly, you know how to get attention. Maybe this
there
will
you
work.
go. Yeah, for
So when
real.
you went off to college, like you get in, you go, you kind of know you're supposed to be there. How did that, I mean, did you immediately feel like, whoa, this is an environment I want to rebel from? Did it feel like, oh no, I know what this is going on and I'm going to go through it? Like, tell me a little bit about entering college in that phase and in that mindset.
Yeah, it's great. I've been so I'll tell you more at some point too, and it's still very early, so it's nothing to even plug. But I've been writing a lot about this period because I think I want to write either a novel based on it or potentially a memoir, because it really was this point in my life. I had gone through so much change. I literally reinvented myself. Losing all those friends, and the reason I had lost the weight was I had really fallen for this girl, thought she was incredible, and she pretty much told me, "You're a good person, but I just couldn't be with someone like you. I don't find you attractive." Both very real and devastating.
Right.
And so that was the catalyst of my change. And so losing a bunch of weight, gaining academic success, getting into college. And then once I hit college, I maintained that high GPA. I maintained a lot of I can go into more details, but I wound up being student body president, student trustee, landed this great job. And so all of that had trained my mind that hard work equals attention, validation, and happiness.
Mhm.
I've been rewriting that story now in my 30s because I'm realizing external validation is not the end all be all. But that was how I had written my internal monologue because I did turn my life around. And it was because of external factors that I was getting that feedback from. So, to actually directly answer your question, I really didn't know, but I just knew I was going to run as fast as I could in any direction that felt right. So, I got there with marketing, didn't full I knew wasn't fully marketing, but I knew that I wanted to do something within the mind. Like I said, I was like, this is interesting. And I knew I wanted to do something where I would be able to continue to tap into that success. I knew I just was like, give me more. And my whole 20s were give me more. Just any way that I could find any avenue to get some external validation, that was what drove me. And that was where my career, as we will discuss, has been kind of jumping around in different places
Yeah.
because it was bets all along the way of how can I get more.
Yeah. I mean, and that, we as we get into your career and out of the education portion, I could that certainly reflects in your career that how do I take on more? You're always doing seven things like, and I think that is a big part
Now it's
of,
like five. I'm getting better.
there you go. You're just, if we could just get down to one, man. Uh, so you're in college, you take some marketing stuff, you're kind of like, maybe this is it, maybe this is not it. At what point did you start gravitating more towards the human sort of part of this? I know you have sort of a human, administration kind of background educationally. At what point did you sort of decide, hey, it's not marketing, it might be over in this other direction?
I probably was freshman year. The biggest thing that I remember is being in a general business. So, like gen eds, went to a state school. First year is you just take pretty much one business class, which is kind of like, this is business, kind of. And they tell you all the different things that you can do. And I remember thinking HR was interesting because I was like, that's the most people-centered one. And
Interesting.
so that was where I began to lean towards HR. I can't remember when I switched over to management, but at some point I did at some point I did the switched over to management. But I knew I didn't want to just do management. I was like, I don't, and it's funny because that's the one through line is I still don't think I want to do like corporate management. I like my corporate job. I like to be an individual contributor, but I don't think I'm going to jump into the managerial track and try to go be a vice president at some Fortune 500. And so, but I knew that was one of the ladders to more, one of the ladders to success. And so I was like, I might as well just pivot to that and then build from there. But at the same time, I was like, but I actually really want to do something in psychology or something in the social sciences. And
Mm.
then it would just happen that I could still graduate in 4 years if I took a management with an HR focus and psychology. So by my sophomore year was when I knew that was the path I wanted to go. The biggest contributors that I can really recall was I had a great HR professor who was what kind of sold me just talking to them about what it would look like for HR. And he kind of opened my mind. It's not just an HR generalist, there's lots of different potential roles there.
Right.
Uh, and then there was a industrial organizational psychology professor. I wish I could remember his name because he probably was the most standout professor that I had in all my undergrad. But he was the one who really convinced me to go for the psychology degree. In addition, and opened my mind to like you could turn this into so many different things. Funny
Mm.
part is no one ever talked about behavioral science. I actually introduced behavioral science to a good chunk of these professors by reading Misbehaving and Nudge and a few of these other canonical books while I was in their classes, trying to read elsewhere to understand how it connects to this field. But yeah, nonetheless, that was where I could really see the seeds of that had been planted sitting in that cafeteria when I was 13, 14, looking at people begin to catalyze into, oh, this could be a profession and people need to understand other people for capitalism to work. And so I could play a role in something where there.
Got it. And so, it is an interesting time in history, to your point, right? This is sort of, you're in school in the sort of 2012 to 2016 kind of range where, you know, it's not 2005 back when I was in school where nobody was talking about no one anywhere was talking about applied behavioral science. Like that wasn't a thing. it,
Hmm.
it was potentially possible to have been in applied behavioral science at the time, but it was still very nascent and it wasn't something you got exposed to. And so you graduate and then you go off to Deloitte, which makes sense, right? I mean, it's sort of you come from this human science perspective, this sort of HR perspective, and then you go off and do human capital at Deloitte, which is sort of a very classic pathway. When you were at Deloitte, were you like, and I'm loving this and this is good and I'm enjoying this, or were you like, no, this is not it?
So fun story about how I wound up at Deloitte. I had an internship with Cummins. So I was sitting in Charleston, South Carolina at a Cummins manufacturing facility. One of my favorite memories of just my life of those 3 months for such a wonderful period. And my manager hands me the human capital trends document from Deloitte.
Okay.
And she goes, "Can you read this and write a little report for the team?" And I read through it and I thought, I don't want to apply this. I want to write this. And that
Hmm.
was literally how I was like, this is my number one company coming out of school. And I was the only
What?
person.
Wait, let's double click on that though. Like, what about the human capital report really made you go, "Ooh, I want to be the person writing this"? Was it the more sort of, "Hey, it's more of an academic, science-oriented take on the thing I'm doing"? Like, what about the report struck you?
My favorite part about any time that I get to do work is I I don't, how do I put this? I have a deep, deep respect for primary knowledge and academics, and I have no desire to be an academic. I love teaching. I love thinking. I love a lot of the roles of an academic, but I don't like the actual structure that is generally contained within. It is changing significantly as our tech field especially, but a lot of fields have to tap more into academics, and it does just become overall more accessible. But I've just never saw myself as fitting into that structure. And so I think what I like about it was I saw this is academic level thinking distilled into a way that managers could read it or HR people could read it or whoever it might be. And I loved that. And then that was my introduction to consulting. And I was like, oh, like these companies to make themselves sellable so they can go and charge $500 an hour for a consultant that has 2 years of work experience to come in and do something. The way they sell that is they say, well, they're following this guide that has been constructed because we've talked to every other chief human resource officer in the Fortune 100, or we talked to the leading academic in this field and this and this. And I realized, like, again, eminence is a real thing, is authority is a real thing. And I liked that consulting a lot is proving authority or proving intelligence in a domain to then sell something. And reading that document, it was the first time that it all kind of played in my mind all together to say, oh, this is an actual job, and this is something I would love to do.
Got it. And so you had this sort of idealized version of Deloitte from this report that you read.
Yep.
Then you go work there. Did you feel like it matched, what you had in your mind? What did you learn? Like, where did it depart?
It did, and it came with a lot of bullshit, as most jobs do. So it was, I think, one of the most incredible opportunities to grow myself and be able to really learn what I wanted to do because it proved that is my favorite thing to do. Even in my role now, a lot of my work is trying to distill what is in the ether. A lot of that is academics. Now it's coming from people building and in a lot of other places too. But taking that, mixing it with my own primary research, and then creating strategy. And I love it. That's what I could do this. As long as there's new technology being built that has unanswered questions, I'm happy doing that. And so I I found myself very excited learning those skills, but that was never my primary job. I was an analyst. So I sat in windowless rooms and basements, cranking out PowerPoints and spreadsheets and things like that. I was working 60 to 80-hour weeks. I was traveling almost every week, and I hated it. It was brutal. I was in a relationship, and it was straining the relationship. It was just an extraordinarily challenging period of time. I'm really glad I told myself it was boot camp. And I said, I got to do my 2 years of business boot camp, and then I'm going to land somewhere good. And I did. So I
And
survived it.
you did survive it. And from there, I mean, you went, then you start going in a different academic direction. Where did, I know you said, hey, I started to do some behavioral science oriented stuff in college, was starting to read these books, was starting to have this perspective. When did you decide, like, hey, I'm going to do this 2 years of business boot camp, but then the next thing is going to be, going off in this applied behavioral science direction, getting more education here, et cetera? Like, where did that come from?
There's two primary factors, I think. I'm loving this. This is great too. It's fun to relive. I haven't really told this full story in a while. One of them is a guy named Jim Gusha, who I think you know.
Hmm?
You ever met him? Yeah.
Yeah, Jim.
He I'll never forget. I read everything he published through Deloitte. He was the chief data scientist. And I saw he was coming to Chicago, and I was going to be there on that Friday. And I was like, I got to meet this guy. So I tried to register for the course that he was teaching, and I couldn't because it's a variety of reasons. So I was like, all right, I'm going to just go to this thing, and I'm going to go introduce
I'm
myself.
going to gate crash.
100%. And I'm so happy I did because I walked up to him. I just said, hey, Jim, I've messaged you a couple times. I get it. You're the chief data scientist. I'm some analyst. Like, it makes sense. I'm not offended, but I would love to talk to you because I am building some great ideas. I want to write some papers. I would love to just tap in with what you're doing. And he appreciated it. And we remained connected. And he said, like, still, it was one of the only times in his career when someone was just like, yo, I got to meet you. We got to work together. Please, I will do anything. And so that catalyzed a lot of fun side projects. And again, that's where I say, like, the actual consulting experience, I'm glad I did it. I learned a bunch of skills. I think it makes me a much better professional in everything that I do. It was business boot camp, but there was not my primary role. I then had a separate job where I was doing these consulting for free along with the team that was charging for it. So these were like some 100-hour weeks sometimes. I would be traveling like from jumping here one week to do my actual work and then for the weekend to go and meet up with the team. It was wild for a little while there. But that was what was telling me this is fun and there's actually work to be done here. The other one is that in combination was through Jim, I got introduced to a whole bunch of other people, like Michael Hallsworth, who was from BIT. He played a really big role in this. I got to go to a couple conferences, and I just started to tap into the other people who now have built incredible careers. Piyush at Ideas 42, I can't remember where he's at now. Like these were guys, you actually.
Fifth Third Bank. He went to Fifth Third Bank as an MD.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, so like, and then that's when I met you. So I think it was somehow through the Deloitte connection that I can't remember how we exactly met, but that was then just reinforcing. I was like, okay, there's some other people out here that are thinking this is going to be a real thing. This is enough where everybody was like, so I got a great GRE score, and everybody was like, you can go to a top tier MBA. And I was thinking about going to U Chicago. I was like, I could go potentially study under Thaler and do that whole thing, but I was like, but I don't want to be an executive. So I don't want to go on that path. I would prefer to go and really lean into this behavioral science side. And so that was when I applied for the master's at UPenn. And a lot of people told me I was crazy. And they were like, why would you not go down the guaranteed path and go try this new field? And I'm really glad I did.
Yeah, I mean, it's shaped the rest of your career. I mean, certainly from a very uh, from getting into that program onwards, you have essentially, had a now a 10-year continuous career as a behavioral scientist.
Yeah.
What was going back to school like? You'd been at Deloitte, you'd had this sort of professional experience, you'd been flying all around and trusted in all these things, and then you go back to school. What was that like to return to an educational environment?
It was so unstructured because when I went to the program, I got accepted into the first cohort and then I postponed it so I could finish the analyst program and then do some other things and then go to it. And it was still so unstructured the second year. I'm so glad I did because it was a little more structured, but it still was, I had so much autonomy. So I picked up consulting gigs. I tried to start a startup. I never really treated it like it was a total academic program, in all honesty. The only things I took very seriously were a couple of the core behavioral science classes that I really respected the professors. And then the best unexpected decision of my career. And it's funny because I've told this story a decent amount when people ask me, like, how did you wind up being now I'm in the Copilot team and I'm helping with the M365 or like the pretty much the strategy of the entire Copilot within everything to do with like Office, Outlook, all those fun things, teams. And people ask me like, how'd you wind up in that role? And I'll say one of the critical things was I decided to take this class by a guy named Clayton Greenberg. And in that class, we were using GPT 1.5. And so I just kind of lucked into learning this technology and learning a lot of the foundational AI primitives that are now becoming everything to do with most of the tech implementations and a lot of where the growth in tech is happening right now. That was the one class I took one of my semesters, and I will never forget, I spent 80% of my time just understanding that class. It was so complex. It was a master's level computer science class. I'd never taken any computer science class in my life. And so that part of the academics I did appreciate because I really was introduced to brand new topics. I was able to upskill myself tremendously in those areas. And then the rest of it, I just knew I was in an Ivy League school, so I was going to milk as much connection and opportunity from that, and I did. And it's how I was able to lay the seeds that I now turn around and harvest years later because of connections I made back then.
What do you think struck you so heavily about that class? Was it just the novelty and it's a like, hey, I've never done this before, and so it's sort of engaging and hooky? Like, what about it made it feel like, hey, this is a place I want to spend 80% of my time?
It's a good question. I'm trying to think of when I decided to take it. So, because I started talking to Microsoft about the job, I took it my last semester, and I started talking to Microsoft, and I had landed my job by I think January or February of that semester. So I knew I didn't know I was going to Microsoft when I decided to take it. I think the real answer is I probably took it to try to impress Microsoft and be like, I am also technically smart, even though I've never held a true tech role. I was in my core role at Deloitte, I was implementing big systems. So I had a tech and I built code, I built integrations, I understood APIs. Like I had a lot of that foundational knowledge, but I had nothing formal. So I think that was the catalyst, was I was just like, I need to take a master's level computer science class so I can weave that into the story of why I did this behavioral science master's.
Hmm.
Why I chose that course, I can't remember what it was called. I think it was like applying artificial systems to big data or something like that. And I was like, that sounds like a bunch of great keywords. I'm gonna go to that one. I think is genuinely what it was.
Good keyword. See, this is naming your classes is key. It's just like naming your anybody who's ever published a paper. I worked a ton with a guy named Andrew Ward, who's been a lifelong friend of mine. He was my professor at college. He and I published a bunch of papers together, and he says his truly great talent is making up titles for papers. Like, he's just good at pithy names. And we want to be entertained as well as learn, and so there's a little showmanship to it.
We're human.
You had locked down the Microsoft job early. What made you even be looking at Microsoft as a potential place to go and do some of this like behavioral research stuff?
So I tried to build a startup, as I had suggested. I started actually when I was at Deloitte, and then I carried it over because Penn had an incubator. So I was in an incubator for my first half of my time at Penn. I attempted to build a startup there. I had another mentor who was a former VP at Facebook, and so I was thought that was where I was going to go. I was kind of waiting and helping. He was helping me try to find the right team, the right. So that was it just felt like a natural. Again, I think the real answer, I could give you a lot of reasons, was I wanted to have more success. And I saw that was the place to go. I was like, I'm either going to go and work for an investment bank and try to figure out how to apply behavioral science to those types of models, or I'm going to go and work for a tech company and I'm going to try to figure out how to apply behavioral science to how product is made. And it came from purely a place of looking at all of the options and what my peers were looking at, and just thinking those were the places I could find the most success and the most success is a that's not a fair word, but and money isn't a fair word either, because money obviously was a factor, but it was like impact is like the that's not a fair word too, because I know great people that went and worked for Ideas 42 and had huge impact on people's lives. So I don't, external validation's too vague too. I don't know exactly what that drive was, but it
Well, there
was I
certainly is a scale piece, right? So I was at
scale.
Microsoft a few years before you, but
Yeah.
had built two successful startups before then, and so, if you sell two things, normally you go build and sell a third thing. And people were very surprised when I went to Microsoft. But, the reality is, you can get acquired off 10,000 active users, right? And I think the first thing I built at Microsoft had like 7 million people day one, right? I mean, so impact is a weird word to your point. Like you can go to Ideas 42 and you can do something really impactful for 100 people in Africa somewhere in a really deep, thoughtful way. But it is very different than the sort of like massive scale that a tech company gives you. And there are very few companies that have that sort of immediacy of scale, um, where you
I
can
think
really launch something.
scale is a really good point, and their scale is a piece there. I think if I really put myself in 25, 26-year-old Connor who's graduating from Penn, I think the real thing, because we can talk about this too, but I started the Applied Behavioral Science Association, and there's that whole segment was I really wanted my name to be known.
Hmm.
That is the impact that I'm trying to describe. Fame is, I feel like, not the right word for it, but that's the closest word, is I wanted to be known for something.
And do you think you want it to be known among behavioral scientists or among non-behavioral scientists? Or do you think you were not differentiating between those two? I mean, there's a very different thing between getting me and Mike Holler to respect you
Yeah.
and getting, sort of people out in the world, in the tech world, to know you as a behavioral scientist. Those are really different things.
I don't know if there was that much I think one of the things that I've realized just over the last couple of years is my identity was so tied to my work
Hmm.
that I don't know if I actually would have ever asked myself that question. It would be I wanted to be known by the things that mattered to me, which ultimately was whatever was tied to the identity, my work identity at that period. So it probably was more behavioral scientists and tech and stuff like that. But that was because that was the scope of my reality. So it felt like my entire world. It felt like everyone, because it was, but it still was very limited scope, because that was the scope of where I was operating within. Because it really, that was my soul. I don't want to say soul, but almost my soul identity.
Got it. And so then you go to Microsoft. Does it does it match the expectations? Like what surprises you? What doesn't surprise you?
I think overall it matched my expectations in the sense of the scale piece. It was like I remember the same thought of like when I'm like, oh, there's like we're a small product and we have almost a million users. Like, oh, that's pretty crazy. Like, wow. And so the scale was definitely fascinating. Quality of people also really amazing, to meet and work with some fascinating people and continue to learn. Opportunity to share and grow my knowledge base, again, huge. I loved it. I love to say it, and it's great to do this and have this recorded so this can go down in history. Is I always like to say you were Microsoft's first behavioral scientist and I was Microsoft's first behavioral researcher. And because I'm pretty sure, and I exhausted it, and I'm pretty sure that is a true statement. And it is something that freedom was amazing. I loved it, because nobody really knew what behavioral science was except for the people who had worked with you and had known the work that you had created. And
Well,
I
and
think
Microsoft is a huge, I mean, people underestimate the scale. You could have 100 behavioral scientists and still have people that weren't exposed to it because it's a 100,000 person company.
100%, 100%. And then it is not only the scale, but also the diversity in the arms of that it's so true. And even applying behavioral science, which is such a broad topic, could look so different in all of those different tentacles. But nonetheless, that part was incredible. And I didn't solve all the world's problems, and I was not able to. The impact that I had was marginal, and I got very disillusioned over time by that.
Hmm.
It was so I liked what I was doing. I also think I was a little overeager. At that point, I'm 27, 28, and I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, I haven't changed the world. I'm not on the Forbes 30 under 30 list. I don't have this booming startup like I thought I might have. Like, and I think another big piece was I literally saw three or four of my friends that were at Snowflake become millionaires overnight and was like, I kind of want to do that. So I should probably go do that now. And so a lot of that can came together to just create a lot of disillusionment over time. But I think that the actual opportunity was incredible. I'm extraordinarily grateful for it. And I did learn a lot about product at the end of the day, of product development, product marketing, everything to do with product, because Microsoft does do a great job at creating product
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think
at scale, like
uh,
enterprise product.
yeah, I was gonna say underappreciated thing. It's hard to do things for 100 million people at a time.
100 million people. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a very different kind of development. So then, I mean, you did get a chance to do something much more entrepreneurial and much smaller. I mean, not small. Tonal wasn't small, small. It wasn't two guys in a room and a dog, but like, you got to pivot to something smaller. What was it like to go from this just massive, Microsoft is a machine.
Yeah.
It is, it knows how to crank the levers to build and sell software in the world. What was it like to go to Tonal where it was a very different sort of set of stakeholders, very different size?
It was. It was so different. And I think so this I'm a guy, I love a good story. Like I love to storytell. I recently was chatting with somebody and I told him I was like your wit is intimidating because it is because I'll be out with him. I won't even call him an acquaintance is a fair word. And I might be at a having drinks with some people and I have to shy, which I have a pretty big personality, but I have to like kind of calm myself down and get small because I'm afraid if I say something, he might snap back with something because he's got incredible wit. And I was like, your wit is intimidating to the point where I have to change my behavior. And then he was like, it's funny because I changed mine because you're such a storyteller. And he's like, when you go tell a story, it's like you captivate an audience. And I want to chime in, but I know if I interrupt you, people are gonna be upset. And so it's just this beautiful difference in communication style, but it really helped reinforce this idea in my head that I'm like, I'm a story guy. And I really have made some big decisions in my life, similar to behavioral sciences we're talking about. Like, I love the story of this new field, and I meet this guy because I'm at Deloitte, and I decide to go and introduce myself. And now he's a great contact, and he's going to write my letter of recommendation to get me into to help me get me into this program. Like, I love a good story. And so, to tie this back, there was a professor at UPenn, Katie Milkman. Really respect her. I think she's some of the work she has done has been canonical for the field.
They will.
And she has a group, Behavioral Change for Good, and they reach out to me and we're like, hey, we've got this startup that connected with us that it wants to start a behavioral science team. It's a great story. So I wound up doing a bunch of interviews, get the job, and that was why I chose the job. That and then the belief that oh yeah, they're gonna pop like Snowflake did, and I'm gonna become a millionaire. Like those that combined, those are not the best reasons to join a company, and I learned that very quickly.
Yeah.
So the opportunity to try to lay down the foundations of behavioral science was incredible. Almost everything else about it was a sink. It was honest. I joined a sinking ship. And so within a couple of months, the promises that were made for me were revoked. And very quickly I realized nobody has any idea how I can be utilized. And they're going to start to have to cut people because this company is failing. And so I knew I was going to be laid off very quickly, grew very disillusioned, hit up my manager back at Microsoft, was like, hey, any chance I could come back? And they were like, we can see it's a big company. So it's like, and I knew, so that it was not, it was a good opportunity and it kickstarted what did turn into a great part of my career where I was able to be at a couple of companies and open up an opportunity to do a lot of external writing and all of those things. So I'm glad it happened. But the truth is I chose the company for the wrong reasons. And then it was a failing company. And so there was never a point where I was like, this was a great decision.
Yeah. But to your point, reflecting on it taught you some things, right? And did kickstart this sort of, you know, trilogy of Tonal, then Twilio, then BetterUp, all three.
Now it was a great decision. Like in
Yes.
retrospect, it
In
was great.
retrospect, lovely.
But it also cost me a marriage and a few other things of just all the stress of the in between. And so great decision for my career. Overall life, that I can figure out in 20 or 30 years. But like nonetheless, it was the start of a great opportunity. But in the 9 months or so that I was there, I don't think there was ever a point when I was like, that was a great decision, Connor. Good job.
This is going well. So he was like, you knew immediately it was on fire. You knew to me it was on fire. It does lead you to this path of smaller companies, right? It wasn't, you hit it, you were like, oh, can I go back to Microsoft? There wasn't really an opportunity to do that. But you got a chance to work at three really distinctive, Tonal, Twilio, BetterUp are three very distinctive cultures, very distinctive startup companies. We've had Hunter Black from BetterUp on, we've
Oh,
had,
cool.
we had folks from that team on. I know the Twilio folks really well. Talk to me about this, like, you know, you've had really different epochs, right? You went from consulting to Microsoft, which is its own huge change. Then you went from sort of Microsoft to these three, smaller organizations, startup. Twilio and BetterUp are pretty big at this point, but startup-ish, right?
Yeah.
Still have some of the vestiges. What was it like to sort of go to these kinds of companies, and what did you learn there?
Yeah, and specifically, I was on a team called Segment at Twilio. And so they were an acquisition that Twilio made. So it still had a very startup-y culture in it.
Hmm.
Um, the path was, I mean, it was great. Like I said, in retrospect, it was awesome. I ultimately got laid off 3 times. So it was like not the best experience it was a very peak and valley sort of experience. But in between, I think the greater thing was that I had referenced earlier that my sole identity was my work self. After the first layoff, that ripped. And I was like, wait a second. And then after the second layoff, I was like, oh, these companies don't care about me. And it really, really reinforced that like this is capitalism. And capitalism does not care about the individual. Only you as an individual get to care about yourself in capitalism. Other ideologies, there's a lot of opportunity to care about each other. But in capitalism, that the money is the thing that matters. And I finally was able to see that. And then I realized more, well, wait a second. I don't need to be this company man. I don't need to be this person that builds my whole identity around this do good for my company. It is instead, I am a worker in the economy that can build myself up, provide value to whoever is ultimately hiring me, whether that's through a consulting engagement, through an actual employment, whatever that is, but I own my career. And that mental shift was the greatest thing for me. It both gave me a lot of relief and allowed me to say, when I'm not working, I should go and enjoy my life. And I should go and build out other parts of my identity so I can go and be a person and then be a worker second when I need to turn into worker mode. So personally, it was a huge opportunity for growth. Then also professionally, I was like, I'm only going to do only work as much as I need to be able to satisfy what I am doing for this company. And then the rest of it, I'm going to go and work in other places if I still want to work. And so I wrote a book and I did it. I spoke at a TEDx and I did all of these other things. We don't even need to really circle back, but I started the applied behavioral science and I scaled it up to a certain degree during this period. And so I did a bunch of these different side projects, we can call them, but really that were like building the worker persona that I now have, that I have the confidence to be able to move into new areas, like being in the AI field now, which I have some academic background. I have experience building tools at BetterUp and Segment with AI and even at Microsoft and before I had come back. So I had relevant experience, but more than anything is I just have confidence now because I'm like, I have experienced and done a whole bunch of different things, especially being at 3 companies, ramping up, delivering value within 6 months, actual impact, and then being laid off and having to do it again. And I had probably about 8 or 9 different companies that I consulted during that period too. Sometimes while I was employed, sometimes while I was in between. On top of that, I did a bunch of case studies and quick interactions for my book. I think I have like 20 or so in the book. And so the level of exposure that I had over those 3 years was profound for both my personal self and my professional self. And it really teed me up to appreciate so much more the stability of a big company these days, where I can go, I can do my job. And now it's nice as I've grown more of that other side of my identity. I sometimes will go and do extra projects, and I still do like 5 things. I could sit here and talk about all the different things. I came into this call talking about how crazy of a week it was. But I also, at least a couple of those things are not just tech and things like that, they're like, I run an events company now, and I do other stuff that this the piece of me that wants to build more than just this traditional path that I had seen started and was created because of that experience of the jumping around different companies, breaking from the traditional, you just keep going up and up and up in whatever company you're at, etc.
So there's a much more portfolio approach to your career now, rather than the sort of like
That's right.
singular, I'm going to be the very best possible version of whatever it means to be a behavioral scientist at Microsoft. Now there's a much more, you have a main job and you're very good at it and you're trying to be good at it. And you're back at Microsoft again, which we can talk about in a minute. But there are a broader set of things, right? That, are work, but they're also just work adjacent, right? There are like other versions. Writing a book is work, but it's work adjacent, right? There are other versions advising folks like Subconscious and other folks. Like there's a much more portfolio approach to your career, which, as you noted, has a lot of strength. It's resilient. You get to try lots of different things. You get to flex different parts of your mind. How do you sort of keep yourself grounded with so many projects going on?
Uh, it is, I mean, it's a battle, and I don't always do it successfully. But I think the core tenets now for me is I have rituals that when they begin to be interfered with, I know something is wrong. And when it comes to work, I've gotten better with that. Now it's funny because again, I'm very confident in work identity self. I've lived that one. That one's been building since I was 17. Personal identity is only a couple of years old, maybe, but now I'm probably like 3, 4 years old. And so that side I've now realized creeps in and overwhelms more than my work side does. Because if like, so I have a morning routine, I meditate in the morning, I work out, and I hit a steam room. That is a thing that I do every morning. My team knows that. I will tell people, hey, if I need to jump on a call before 9:30, then I'm going to do it at the gym, or I'm going to do it while I'm walking my dog, or something like that. And that's a ritual. I enforce it. Obviously, if once in a while I have to deviate, but that is a ritual that I know if I begin to have to break that for a sustained period of time, then everything begins to fall down.
Hmm.
There's other rituals in my life like that that I know I have to keep in my life to keep the stability so that I can show up because I do ultimately do a lot too. Like everyone that I meet is like, how the hell do you do all these different things? And it is the rituals, it is the structure, and it is ruthless prioritization. And that is a skill that again has come with confidence where I say no a good amount. And I tell people I scope things pretty well. And I try my best. I think accountability is the number one thing that you have to be effective because you have to have trust in people to tell them I will be able to deliver this. And then I also will hold myself accountable where if that begins to slip the second I'm like, that might not be realistic anymore, I have to communicate to that person what's going on. And I have to again say no to things. It hurts people. It's not fun, but I have to say no to things because if I don't do that, then the rituals begin to slip because I'm having to push those things into that time and then everything falls apart. I've burnt myself out a couple times over the last 10 years. And I know when I'm useless, then everything falls apart. Like then everything is not delivered. And so I have to, it is truly a daily battle that I'm thinking to myself, am I actually at a sustainable period right now? And as soon as it begins to uptick, I have to do whatever I can to get it down.
And you've got some external environmental things that are helping you do that, right? In the form of both alerting you, hey, these rituals are getting interrupted, and the rituals themselves are those that, meditating is always going to lower your stress level. A steam room is going to lower your stress level. Like working out is going to lower your stress level. Um, so I can certainly hear that. Talk to me about coming back to a company. Now that's an interesting experience that not everybody has a chance to do, to have a second chapter at the same company. Talk to me about returning to Microsoft and what that was like.
It's not uncommon unless you're at really Microsoft, especially. I think Microsoft has one of the biggest boomerang. They literally have a name for it. They call it boomeranging. Like, and people are like triple, quadruple boomerangs. The
Yes.
best part is they tell you your tenure isn't even your current stint. So I technically have been with Microsoft for over 5 years.
Right.
But it's just like combine the different pieces. Like it's hilarious how often there are people. I've been back for like almost 2 years now. And in that time, I have seen so many other people come back that have also, it's like this person's been with the company for 12 years over 4 periods. So nonetheless, it is super common at Microsoft. So it probably feels much different. But honestly, it was supernatural. It was like I came back, I hit up all my old colleagues and was like, "Hey, I'm back." And most of them were like, "Cool." And then they were like, "We're really far apart now." And I was like, "Cool, I'll probably never work with you, but it was just want to say hi."
But it
And
was
then
really good to see you.
yeah, but and then you just jump right in and it's like joining a new company. So, and because I am so distant, once in a while, I'm working with another team right now actually, and I saw somebody I was like, "Oh, I worked with you in the past." And I just was like, "Hey, we're actually gonna work together. Like this actually, we don't have to cut through all the noise of getting to know each other and stuff." So it was, it made things a little bit more efficient. But yeah, I don't have that much more else to say on it because honestly, it's so natural. No one's ever been like, "That's weird. Why'd you leave and come back?" Like it's just everybody knows. It's like, yeah,
And it
you
is
do it.
very, to your point, it's very cultural to Microsoft. I mean, there are people come in and out. It's encouraged to go, yeah, go try that startup, go try that thing. Like, there is a very open door, welcome back kind of version of, which is not always true other places. I mean, I think there are places who, I know companies that have a little bit more of a chip on their shoulder about you leave, and then they're like, we don't want you back again,
For
right?
sure.
Or they'll make you pay for it socially or culturally. They'll sort of, how dare you leave? We will
100%.
bring you in at a lower salary or a lower title or lower whatever.
No, overall, and too, and in the macro sense, I think Microsoft's a great company. I really am grateful to be here. Like it is us. It's a big company, and all big companies have their big company things. But it is, I think of all of the tech companies and being here in Seattle, I interact with people that work at all the companies. I really do think it's a relative to everyone else. It is a great company, and then at the absolute, it's I've enjoyed my time. I felt very respected. I've never been I never had any issues like that where it can get really cutthroat. And having been at a lot of companies, especially through the consulting and everything, there's a lot of people that are not fun to work with. And I'm glad that I don't have to work with any of them.
Yeah. I mean, certainly I chose Microsoft on personality, right? I mean, you sort of compared at the time. I remember everybody I met at Google was divorced, and everybody at Microsoft was like married, had kids, like really liked skiing. They're like, yeah, if we get good snow, everybody just kind of stops working and goes and skis for the day, and then we come back and go back to work. And I was like, that's a healthy, and certainly within a company the size of Microsoft, you can burn out, you can work all the time. Like, that's not everybody's having that experience, but it is not, as a culture, it generally is a kindish culture. What, you know, because you have a portfolio approach, you've got advisory stuff, you've got, sort of association, you got lots of different things across your plate. When you start thinking about where you want to go from here, you've been at Microsoft again, you've been back for about 2 years, which is when people kind of start picking their head up and looking at the next thing. How do you think about where you want to take your career in behavioral science? And I'm not saying what's your next job. I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
how do you sort of approach that topic for people?
When you say for people,
Well, I mean, like, imagine I came to you for advice and I said, I've been here two
oh
years. I'm
gosh.
ready to start thinking about my next thing. Where do you point people? How do you encourage them to think about what comes next?
I try to be very realistic, number one. And then I think and I say that and I'll come back in a second to that point. But then I think my favorite framework of this is the Four Idols framework. I forgot who it originated. It's one of the original philosophers, but David Brooks wrote about it recently, the last couple of years. And it's like he pretty much argues everybody has four idols. It's power, pleasure, money, and fame. And I think from every person I've ever pushed on this, that if you really push them, they will come back to one of those four idols. And some people go, none. And I go, yes, that's pleasure. And so I think that there really is those are the four drivers. And I think it's really important to ask yourself, what is the main driver for you? What is the thing that you worship? Because that will guide the best career decision for you. If it is money, if money was the biggest thing for me, then I probably could go and jump back into a startup at this point. I've written about the space enough. I can genuinely say now I probably one of only about maybe 100 researchers with deep experience now working with LLMs, with co-working agents, with all of these things that are being actively built right now. One of the few people in the world that's doing this work at the highest level with millions of customers. I could go and find a startup that's trying to do something in this space and risk it to go and get that Snowflake IPO and print out a bunch of cash. I don't think I will.
With a
I'm
very different, I mean, that's a very different mindset than how you chose Tonal, right? You talked
100%.
about how
100%.
the
Yeah.
sort of tonal mistake, right? You're talking about a very different kind of decision, and then choosing it or not choosing it consciously.
Money has never been the idol for me. And I made that decision as if money was the idol for me because it was the Snowflake IPO that really seeing that I was like, I gotta get into a startup. I gotta, it's everybody's just printing money out here. Why am I not doing it? And so that's not the thing that's driven me. And so I continue to ask myself that question. And most of my career, my idol has been fame. And so that is still driving me to some degree. But I have the option to write another book, and I've had zero motivation to write a book on AI right now. And I'm like, that could actually be a pretty popular book, but I still don't think it's still the motivation isn't there. So I'm beginning to ask myself, is fame actually really the driver, or have I slowly been transitioning to pleasure? And if it's pleasure, then as long as I can keep doing this work, I make more than enough. I'm happy. I have a lot of opportunity to place my time into a lot of different opportunities. I could do this for a while. I mean, I like my work enough that it's engaging. And if it's pleasure, I have a good amount of pleasure in my life and I could continue to maximize for that, working as much as I need to enjoy myself and then just enjoying myself. The fame still is there. And it's why, like you reference, I mean, I say this and then I still am doing a bunch of different side projects, all of which are to achieve some level of fame. I'm advisors. Well, the advisor is both for money and for fame, is like, and it's great to be an advisor for an AI company. I'm technically an advisor for two AI companies, one that I'm actively in and one that's passive. But both of those would be great if they popped and became unicorns. I mean, that'd be cool. And so I still do that. And there is still a part of me that's like, I do really want to like change how I've written so much and Microsoft's a great place, but it's still, I mean, you were there and anybody that's in a corporate job to really make change for a big company, it takes so much stakeholder building and so much you got to do. Where if I was at a startup right now and it was just 10 people, and I was like, all right, guys, this is the strategy. Let's spend the next month building it. We probably could actually do it in a month. But again, it wouldn't be the scale. So there's all these questions that bounce around my head. But I'm trying to drive where is my 5 year vision of just how will I be the most pleased with my decisions? And then to circle back to the reality is like the reality is we're probably at the end of a gold rush with tech, and the amount of jobs are shrinking. The power that workers have has dramatically shifted, and the companies have a lot more power now, especially with the skill set that I have. I have a very niche experience, and so I'm grateful for that because it will make me marketable. But my overall skill set is just a wash. I talk to incredible people all the time with amazing PhDs or years of experience being a researcher there that are not finding jobs because the overall researcher pool has shrunk, or the pool of researchers has grown and then the opportunities for them has shrunk. And so the reality is that like I don't think I want to take any big risks right now. I would prefer to stay as long as is, or at least right now, I would like to continue this as long as it's possible. Reality is layoffs are very real, even in big tech too. So it's not to say that I'm even secure at this point. But yeah, that is the short answer to the very long monologue that I just said is I don't fully know. And I'm kind of okay with that right now because I'm enjoying myself and I have a pretty good life. And so that's cool. I don't need to actually change anything significantly at this point. And while I enjoy it, I've been just thinking a little bit more about what's next.
Yeah. And what, and I hear you on the beyond work. I mean, I think you're finding your idols and those idols can change over time and our perspectives on them can change and we'll have you back again 5 years from now on the podcast and it'll be different and that's okay and that's part of to your point the story that we tell ourselves. But thank you so much for coming and telling your story today. I mean, I think every story that we add to this canon of applied behavioral scientists and how they got there and the journey that they went through, there are themes we can see. They're entrepreneurial. You have to have some sort of motivation to go into a field that's new, right? That takes kind of particular kind of person to go into a non-traditional field, et cetera. So we do see some themes, but every story is really unique and different. And I really appreciate you coming and sharing yours with us today. Thanks, Connor.
Appreciate it, Matt. Yeah, it was lovely to chat with you, and it has been. You and I'd like to just end it on this because it's fun. I think you and I have always had good discussions about is behavioral science its own field,
Yeah.
and we've gone back and forth and back and forth, and I've gone back and forth, and And I still don't have an answer. And honestly, I care less about the answer than I once did. But what I do know is true is that behavioral science is woven throughout everything we do because we are people and we are very complex. And trying to understand why we make the decisions we do is a field of study because it's extremely relevant for, again, everything, since we are the main players in all the systems that we've created. So I'm really grateful I've gotten a chance to play a role with this and get to meet a lot of great people like you and others along the way. So thanks for having me.